Well, I guess we have a new hero in America. Her name is Recy Taylor. Her claim to fame is in 1944. Let me do my math here real quick. Oh yeah, that is 74 years ago. In 1944, 6 white men raped Recy Taylor, a black woman. She survived and went on to file a complaint with police and to speak up for black women all over the country. That's more than Melissa Harris Perry said is what most black women do. She said when black women get raped or they're victims of domestic violence, they don't report it because they're afraid of all the white racism that their men are going to encounter when they get arrested.
So I start with a little bit of trepidation in this conversation, in part because I know that some of the critiques of this is the very idea that Western press, that those who are not from these nations, who are not Muslim ourselves, who are not part of these traditions, can look at your article and say, look at how horrible those men or those societies or that religion is. And it's something, it's part of why, for example, we have an underreporting of rape and domestic violence in African American communities, because we know the violence enacted on black men by police, so we often don't call.
So a few weeks ago at the Golden Globes, Oprah Winfrey started making this woman famous. She started talking about Recy Taylor from 1944 last at the State of the Union speech the other night. A bunch of black women, members of Congress, wore buttons saying Recy Taylor. Remember Recy Taylor.
Because of a lot of magnificent women, many of whom are right here in this room.
Okay, here's the deal I'll make. Let's take every black woman raped by a white guy over the last 75 years. Then let's take every white woman murdered by a black guy over the last 75 days. Anybody want to match up the numbers? You had to go back 70. You had to go back, let me see, do the math again, 74 years to get an example of white on black rape. Yet on this channel every day, we're reporting black on white murder, often women, at the hands of black men, just like these two stories.
Tonight at 11, the man accused of shooting a young woman, then leaving her to suffer for hours, is behind bars.
Hey.
And at this hour, we're learning about the dispute investigators say led to an innocent woman's murder. And tonight, we learned that woman died over a 2-week-old confrontation that had nothing to do with her. Good evening, I'm Martha Sagowski.
And I'm Greg Wormuth. That's our top story tonight. Channel 9's Samantha Manning following the story live for us from the Orange County Jail. Sam, you questioned that suspect earlier, and he told you he wants to take this to court.
Greg, he denied doing anything wrong, and he says he wants to take this to trial. Now tonight, he's here sitting in this jail charged with several felonies, including murder. Tonight, deputies walked out 21-year-old Felix Bourbon in handcuffs and took him to the Orange County Jail. Felix, is there anything you want to say to Marie's family tonight?
Hey, I'm going to trial.
That's all Bourbon would say. Deputies say he lured 29-year-old Marie Guth to drive with them to settle a problem he had with other people. It was a problem deputies say the victim had nothing to do with.
We believe that there was some sort of a beef, maybe a 2-week-old beef.
Deputies say Guth didn't know why she was really with him. And at some point, they say Bourbon shot her, leaving her on Silver Star Road and North Powers Drive.
We believe that our suspect shot our victim, leaving her in that particular location for probably in the area of 5 to 7 hours before she was discovered.
Deputies released these photos of Guth's tattoos after she was found Sunday morning. She died at the hospital yesterday. The Orange County Sheriff's Office says Bourbon has an extensive criminal record, which includes multiple violent felonies in Florida and other states.
On December 8th, a concerned friend contacted police to request a welfare check because she was concerned when she couldn't reach Miss Graves. Officers responded and knocked on the door, however, no one answered and the car was gone. On December 10th, the concerned friend contacted police again as she had been in Miss Graves' home and reported that it had been ransacked.
You know, if you were looking for a profile of your average Oprah viewer, your average Oprah fan, the average woman who subscribes to Oprah's magazine, who watches her television show or reads her books, who passes it around, who belongs to the Oprah Book Club, they would not look like those members of Congress wearing the Recy buttons. They would look like this woman, Kimberly Graves, the woman that was just killed out in Colorado. She's the one that goes around telling everybody light and love. Now her parents are saying, yes, we're going to get justice, but let's spread light and love for Kimberly Graves, who is a victim of some very, very, very nasty black violence and murder. You know, we did a story a year or two ago out of the federal park system. So they found, and I guess that's, it's kind of the same, but Kimberly Graves was found in a state park, a big park. Well, we did a story that came out of the New York Times, the travel section. Said, why don't black people use the federal parks? And this became a thing, right? Lots and lots of papers and news sites, big ones around the country, kind of did stories about the fellas. They don't go to the federal parks. They asked, so they found this one family in the New York. This is the New York Times. They said, hey, what's up? Why don't you go to the federal parks? They go, well, when we were growing up, we thought the Klan lived there and all they did was kill people in the federal parks. That's the New York.
There was a time when I would see African Americans at such an infrequent rate that when I saw them, it was just that silence. And that was once every month or so when I first came here. But now my expectation is that every day I'm here at my job, I will see an African American.
In 2013, after visiting several national parks and not seeing people of color, not seeing African Americans, I started to grow concerned as to why that is. So I asked, is this a problem for the Park Service? And the Park Service will openly admit to this being a problem. They just don't have the means to solve it. So it will take grassroots organizations such as mine to come in and engage communities of color in these outdoor spaces.
Their families haven't taken them to places like this because their families don't believe that there's a cultural connection or that these places are places for them. Because the key thing to keep in mind is that African Americans have come out of a history of exclusion, not inclusion. So it's nice for us to actually receive an invitation and so that there's a sense of safety that when we get there, we'll be treated fairly and we'll be treated with respect. There are African Americans right now who have become the director of the National Park Service. I'm referring to Bob Stanton. There are African Americans who are right now chief rangers, but they are in general unknown to the larger culture of African Americans. So there needs to be a little bit more clarity and an expression of the accomplishments that these pioneers have made.
Before there was a National Park Service in 1916, it was the U.S. Army that took care of all the national parks. And it just so happened that during that period, there was the 9th Cavalry, which was an all-black unit. Well, the Buffalo Soldiers were African-American soldiers that were allowed to join the regular U.S. military after the end of the Civil War. So they went to Yosemite and protected it from poachers, protected it from people who would start forest fires. And part of that whole history has been sort of lost in the way American history is taught.
I never saw people that really looked like me on the trails. You know, I was fortunate enough to, have a father that was a lover of nature too. And so at an early age, I remember one of our first national parks, we went to Yosemite. And I was just blown away. And we hiked up to the falls. And I've been hooked. I've been hooked ever since.
It's important for people of color to develop or reestablish relationships with the outdoors so that in 15 to 20 years, when people of color are the #1 demographic in the country, we will have established those relationships.
When Olivia is an adult and she's my age, I really hope that these parks are preserved. Giving her this introduction now, I hope that this seed is planted so deep within her that, we never know, we may be raising one of the world's, conservation is. But this is just beautiful. It's beautiful, and we need to protect it.
That's the kind of fairy tales that about race that just slip into the mainstream media and grow and grow and grow and grow without challenge. But every once in a while, some fact actually slips in. And the fact of this story is it took you 74 years to go back and find a victim of white on black rape when we can find the opposite here every 74 hours. That's how insane things are now. That's how determined the people are who are in denial, deceit, and delusion. So as the violence escalates, so must the deception. So must our efforts on all fronts must also escalate, not to make the black kids angry.